Welcome one and all. And it's certainly a beautiful day out there, isn't it? And I noticed the other day that 10 years ago we had a terrible snowstorm. I put pictures up on Facebook just to remind people that we can feel blessed even when we don't even think about that we're being blessed. There wasn't a snowstorm the other day. And we were blessed that we survived that last one. Well, I don't know if that was the last one, but anyways, around here, we live in the beginning stages of the spring season. Spring blossoms of all kinds were springing up in the ground out of this beautiful property that the Lord has provided us with. I'm sure God's angels work as gardeners, don't you think? He plants the gardens out there and he takes care of them, and he put tulips. We have quite a few tulips out the front here, and certainly there are plants that I have no idea what they are, and these daffodils up here are certainly blooming away. This bunch of daffodils came up just almost out of nowhere, like, who planted all of those? They have to have been God's angels, because they weren't there last year, but there they all are this year. Under the trees, in the middle of the field, in strange places where, how did those flowers get there? In the 3 acres of property, God has used his imagination on how to give us joy and beauty. And I'll never get bored of that. This is a very large group of daffodils that came up almost out of nowhere. A gentleman named James Oppenheim said, "The foolish man seeks happiness in the distance, and the wise grows it under his feet." And this is what the Lord wants every believer to understand. We're supposed to find fulfillment and contentment right where God placed us. We are to bloom where we are planted. We are to bloom where we are planted. An individual named Craig Carlisle shared the story of how he left his home in rural Ohio in order to move to New York City to become an artist. And while there, he began longing for home. However, even though he missed his childhood home, he came to realize how important it was to find contentment right where he was currently planted. Carlisle stated, so right there, right where he was currently planted. And he said, "My part-time job in New York City to help make men eat meat was being a helper to a rooftop gardener. The gardening job became a metaphor in my life and my studio. It was a healing experience to rip apart the earth and in its place unite a new, innocent flower for others to behold." I just really enjoy these flowers that come up every year under the back deck. He went on to say He missed his friends back in home in Columbus and the carefree life that he once lived there. However far he is away from the mystery that separates him from the place he knows as home, he will always remember the banner that hung in his family's home growing up as a child, and it said, "Bloom where you are planted." We have some wild, can't think of the name of it now.
Himalayan balsam.
And we have Himalayan balsam, and they're just gorgeous. It can be challenging to have a sense of joy when adversity seems to know your address and your world seems to be upside down and your world seems to be falling apart. When something is adverse, it is generally considered to be unfavorable. The important thing is how you respond to adversity. Sometimes adversity messes your plans up big time. I was smacked with the adversity of major pain, which impeded my studying ability big time this past 2 weeks on the topic that I was wanting to address. The topic of blooming where you are planted. I found this message I am going to borrow from a Reverend D. Dwayne Phillips from February the 17th of 2022. Thank you, Reverend Philip, wherever you are. He said, life can sometimes be tough, and we can feel as though we're the dirt that the rooftop gardener is ripping apart. However, in that soil that's being crumbled and torn into tiny pieces is where a new flower is planted to grow and to blossom. Life may not be ideal where you are, but it's in that broken, aerated soil that God wishes to grow a beautiful flower. Us. And this is what we're going to discuss in today's message. Blooming where we're planted and trusting the hands of the master gardener. The New Living Translation reads in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 17, and I quote, "You must accept whatever situation the Lord has put you in and continue on as you were when God first called you. This is the rule for all the churches." Do we readily accept the situation that God's put us in or where He's allowed us to be? Do we believe that where we are is where the Lord really wants us to be? In America, we tend to, and I say North America as well as America, as well as Canada, we tend to subscribe to the belief that we're not in God's will unless we're prospering or receiving material or monetary blessing. If we apply this belief to Christians living in third world countries, then we would have to conclude that they are not in God's will, or that they are not in a right relationship with God. This, of course, is an unscriptural conclusion. Here in North America, consumerism has led many people to believe that this or that product is what is needed to make us happy. And this kind of thinking has carried over into every other area of life. It can cause us to think that if we only had this type of life or that type of occupation, then we could be truly happy. We're often looking for something better in life, when really the Lord could have us where we are for a reason. Where we are right now could be God's will, even if it seems unpleasant or contrary to our own standards. In today's society, we hear a message that says, if only our situation were different, we would be happier and more fulfilled. And where does all this lead? It leads to a general dissatisfaction with life, as well as further unhappiness. And perhaps worst of all, it keeps us from being the man or the woman of God that we were created to be, because it leads us to believe that we are not in a position to serve God yet. If only we could change that or this, then we would really be able to serve God. But not now. Not in our current situation. This is the lie that the Apostle Paul will address in our text. God wants us to bloom where we have been planted. He can use us right now in the situation in which we find ourselves. Think about this fact. Secondary situations don't bring contentment. Was anyone called while being circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised. Was anyone called while uncircumcised? Let him not be circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 18 and 19. In Paul's time, circumcision was a big deal, for it was a special mark designating a Jew as being one of God's chosen people. It was also a mark of blessing. We live in a totally different society now, and I know you'll readily agree that peace and contentment in life is not found in circumcision. To make this applicable today, peace is not found in what we have or don't have, or in our earthly possessions or positions. Paul was saying, be satisfied with what you have. Be satisfied with what you have. This earthly thing of circumcision won't bring you happiness. He said that circumcision or uncircumcision is nothing, that this earthly thing doesn't amount to a hill of beans in God's eyes. It's not really important. It's secondary to what really counts in life. When we allow these secondary situations to become our primary focus, we become unhappy and dissatisfied. We fix our gaze on all the things that we would like to change. We concentrate on what is wrong. We mull over and over and over and over and over in our mind the way things ought to be. When it comes to serving in God's kingdom, focusing on the things that appear to be wrong or not deal with cause us to stand around and to do nothing. A fellow named John McLellan says, "It's amazing what can happen when we simply do the best we can do, whatever we are doing, no matter how insignificant it may seem. We can be frozen into activity, waiting for more time, more money, more resources, more people, whatever, and not use what we have already been given. Sometimes focusing on secondary situations can make us refuse to serve the Lord if we don't get the preferred position or desired circumstances." A fellow named Neil T. Anderson says, "An important concept about the will of God that my students here at seminary is, bloom where you are planted. Be the best you can be at your present assignment, and stay there until God calls you elsewhere." Oftentimes my students will say, "There are no openings to serve at my church." My response is, "Oh yes there are. They are probably begging for someone to teach third grade boys." The momentary silence reveals this thought: but anyone can teach third grade boys. I had something bigger in mind, like maybe an opening in the Trinity. Take the opportunity before you and teach those third grade boys. Decide to be the best teacher they've ever had. People hearing of your faithfulness and aware of the fruit you are bearing may ask you to consider a full-time pastoral position. God guides those who bloom where they are planted. So, you can see what happens when you begin looking for peace and contentment in other places than where God has currently planted us. Do you see how easily we can become distracted to what the Lord wants for our life? This all happens when we focus on things that are secondary to what really counts in life. Keeping God's commands brings contentment, but keeping the commandments of God is what matters. Let each one remain in the same calling in which he was called. That's from 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 17 to 20. The New Living Translation reads, "The important thing is to keep God's commandment. You should continue on as you were when God called you." There's an expression which says, "Keep the main thing." The main thing. So what is the main thing that believers must keep as the central focus of their life? It is to keep God's commandments and to live one's life pleasing to the Lord, instead of focusing on all the other situations that are not ideal. We need to focus on living a life fully committed to following Jesus Christ. So, where is a believer to live his or her life fully committed to following Jesus Christ? The Apostle Paul said, "You should continue on as you were when God called you." Or, "Let each one remain in the same calling." We're called to serve God and be obedient to Him right where we are, in our current job, in our current city, in our present financial situation, in our present social status, or whatever it is, wherever it is that we currently find ourselves. Our primary calling in the Christian life is the call to obedience. Physical freedom doesn't bring contentment. Were you called, a slave? Do not be concerned about it. But if you can be made free, rather use it. For he who is called in the Lord while a slave is the Lord's freed man. Likewise, he who is called while free is Christ's slave. You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of men. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 21 to 23. Paul continued to say that even if we should find ourselves in one of the worst possible situations, that of slavery and bondage, we can and should still serve the Lord. Not many Americans know the pain and utter hopelessness of slavery. However, some people feel as though they're slaves or even prisoners of sickness and disease. Paul was trying to emphasize that peace isn't found in our physical state of being or existence, or in our circumstances. Our situation in life is secondary to what really matters. Paul earlier spoke about the secondary situation of earthly possessions and positions. And here he addressed one's physical state of being. One way in which our physical state of being can become a concern or a discussion is when we're physically ill. There's a lady named Dee Crido, a single mother with a chronic disease and chronic illness known as lupus disease. She provided an applicable and inspirational testimony when she said, "Every so often when we go on walks or when we used to go hiking, my children and I would find the most beautiful flowers in the most unlikely places. We always called them paradise flowers. You know, the flowers that you expect to see blooming in the beautiful, lush, exceptionally green forest or field. Yet here were these extraordinary flowers in the harshest condition, thriving, blooming, adding their own beauty in an otherwise devoid of life beauty." I think about these paradise flowers often, and I know in my heart that God puts them there to remind us. He wants us to remember that no matter what life throws our way, no matter where we are planted, we are meant to bloom, we are planted there for a reason. Physical illness can be a devastating thing, and it's easy to become distracted to serving the Lord by one's pain or associated depression, or even self-pity. But as Creidel testified, we can have the right attitude and look past our disabilities to see that God has a plan for our life and that He wishes to use us. Illness is not the only physical situation that can distract us from serving the Lord. Some people feel as though they're slaves or prisoners to trials and circumstances. The devotional guide, Our Daily Bread, provides an illustration about blooming while in the middle of trial and difficulty. A little girl walking in a garden noticed a particularly beautiful flower. She admired its beauty and enjoyed its fragrance. "Oh, it's so pretty," she exclaimed. As she gazed on it, her eyes followed the stem down to the soil in which it grew. "This flower is too pretty to be planted in such dirt," she cried. So she pulled it up by its roots and ran to the water faucet to wash away the soil. It wasn't long until the flower wilted and died. When the gardener saw what the little girl had done, he exclaimed, "You've destroyed my favorite plant." "I'm sorry, but I didn't like the dirt." "I didn't like it being in that dirt," she said. The gardener replied, "I chose that spot and mixed the soil because I knew that only there could it grow to be a beautiful flower." Often we murmur because of the circumstances into which God has sovereignly placed us. We fail to realize that He is using our pressures, trials, and difficulty, or the dirt, to bring us to a new degree of spiritual beauty. Contentment comes when we accept what God is doing and thank Him for it. Contentment enables you to grow where God has planted you. We may be in the middle of some pretty ugly circumstances. Our life may seem dirty and a complete mess from all the junk that come our way. We may be tempted to just give up on serving God. We must remember, however, that all of those bad things are the dirt which becomes the fertile soil in which God wants us to grow and blossom. Therefore, we need to choose to be content right where we are, to serve the Lord where we are. Remember, bloom where you are planted, as you take note of 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 17. And I quote, "Brethren, let each one remain with God in that state in which he was called." The New Living Translation reads, "So, dear brothers and sisters, whatever circumstances you were in when you became a believer, stay there in your new relationship with God." And 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 24 says, Paul left one last reminder to bloom where you are planted. And then he emphasized that the Lord called us to the place where he currently finds us and where we currently find ourselves. We might say, well, I'm experiencing trials right now. I don't believe that God called me to go through the difficulty. God didn't cause the trial we're experiencing, but he does allow them to happen, either as a test or as a result of our sin. The thing we need to remember is that the Lord knew ahead of time what we would endure. And what he calls us to do is continue in obedience and keep serving him in the midst of our trials. At times, God calls us to take a time of reflection. Life circumstances may not be ideal where we are. We may be struggling financially, living on retirement income, or our health may be suffering. We may be even struggling with feelings of insignificance, having a desire to serve the Lord, and feeling that we could serve him so much more effectively in a different situation, or maybe a different location for some people. Joyce Meyer, evangelist Joyce Myers, encourages, you are not where you are by accident. If you are trusting God and you believe your steps are ordered by him, then whatever you are, wherever you are right now, is where you are supposed to be. Our job is not to worry about where we are planted, but our job is to bloom where we are planted. Once you are satisfied, happy, and fruitful where you are, expect God to bless you beyond belief. Will you make an attempt to bloom where you are planted? Faithfully serving God where you are, or will you hold off serving him until you get to the right place or the right circumstances or the right situation? I want to leave you with a poem that provides strength and encouragement to carry on right where you are. The poem is entitled, Bloom Where You Are Planted. Bloom where you are planted. That's what the Lord says too. When he transplants his children, dear, and they're forced to start anew. Bloom where you are planted, though it be dark or bright. Some blossoms give their fragrance best in the darkest hours of the night. Bloom where you are planted. Be strong, be not afraid. The winds may blow and the sun may beat, but your spirit droop and fade. Bloom where you are planted. You will withstand the strain. God's life within will guarantee that his plants will remain. So I encourage each of you to go out today and bloom where God plants you. That's all you need to be doing, is blooming where you're planting and letting God take your blooms to, I guess, sort of fertilize someone else. So go forth and bloom where you are planted. that his plants will remain. And when you're blooming, when you're planted, I like the song that Andrea chose to finish this morning off. Make me a blessing. Make me a blessing.